The ticking of the wall clock was like a hammer. Tick, tock. A relentless rhythm far too loud in the silence of the small room. Kiara Goldberg felt every vibration on her skin. The wool of her sweater scratched her neck, a constant distraction. The light filtering through the thin window was a sickly yellow, painting stripes of dust in the air. She could smell the toast from a neighbor's apartment, and the faint scent of fabric softener drifting from the hallway. It was a bombardment, an assault of sensations most people wouldn't even notice. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on just one thing: the pattern of the worn wood on the floor. Lines, knots, imperfections, an order in the chaos. This room was a universe away from her old life, a place so small and noisy it felt like it was screaming. And amidst all this noise, one question floated in her mind, as loud as the clock. What was she doing here? Where are you watching this story from today? Let us know in the comments. And if you don't want to miss any of our heartwarming stories that show how life can change in an instant, subscribe to the channel right now. You won't want to be left out. Levi Park stared at the pile of bills on the kitchen table, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. Each envelope was a reminder of his failures. The electricity bill, overdue. The rent, eating up more than half his salary. The notice from his daughter Hannah's school about the field trip fee he still hadn't managed to pay. He ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. Being a single dad was a marathon with no finish line. He worked as a stalker during the day and delivered food at night. He slept 5 hours if he was lucky. Also, Hannah, his little 8-year-old Hannah, would have a roof over her head and food on the table, but it never seemed to be enough. The apartment was small, with thin walls and a heater that stubbornly failed in the winter, but it was their home, the only one they'd known since his wife left. The idea of renting out the spare room, the small space that served as storage for things they no longer used, came from sheer desperation. It was a sacrifice of their privacy, an invasion of their tiny sanctuary. But the math didn't lie. The extra money would mean not having to choose between paying the electricity bill and buying Hannah a new coat. It would mean perhaps a little breathing room. He posted an ad online, a knot tightening in his stomach. He interviewed 3 people. A noisy student who talked about parties. An older man who smelled of cigarettes and looked around the apartment with disdain. A young woman who seemed nice but recoiled as soon as she saw Hannah's toys scattered around the living room. Nobody felt right. Nobody felt safe. He was about to give up, to accept he'd have to find a third job, when Kiara Goldberg appeared. She arrived promptly at 6 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, dressed in simple but well-tailored clothes. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail. What struck Levi most was her gaze. She didn't meet his eyes directly. Her gaze seemed to fix on a point just above his shoulder, as if eye contact were physically painful. Her answers to his questions were short, direct, almost robotic. Yes, she was an astrophysics student at the university. No, she didn't smoke or drink. Yes, she understood the house rules about noise after 10 p.m. She didn't try to bargain the price. She didn't ask about the neighbors. She just looked at the small, clean room he'd tidied up, observed the window that faced a brick wall, and said in a low, monotone voice, "I'll take it." Hannah, who had been peeking from the living room doorway, ran and hid behind Levi's leg. Kiara saw her, and her body seemed to stiffen for a moment. Levi's heart ached. Maybe she didn't like children either. "This is my daughter, Hannah," he said, trying to force a friendly tone. Kiara just nodded once without smiling. Then she opened her purse and pulled out an envelope. Inside was the exact amount for the first month's rent and the deposit. In cash. Levi hesitated. There was something about her. A fragility. An aura of someone who didn't belong. She looked like a bird with a broken wing. But the money in the envelope was real. His need was even more real. He thought of the school trip, the winter coat. He looked at Hannah, hiding behind him, and made his decision. "Welcome, Kiara," he said, taking the envelope. At that moment, he had no way of knowing that this decision would not only save his finances but change their lives in a way he could never have imagined. The first few weeks were an exercise in strange cohabitation. Kiara Goldberg was a silent, spectral presence in the apartment. Levi and Hannah barely saw her. She left for university before Hannah woke up and returned late at night, going straight to her room. The only signs of her existence were the low hum of the blender at exactly 7:05 a.m., preparing the same green smoothie every day, and the dishes she used always washed, dried, and put back in the exact same place. She seemed to move in her own world, with invisible rules only she knew. Levi tried to be friendly. "Good morning, Kiara," he'd say when he encountered her in the kitchen. She'd reply with a quiet, "Good morning," without looking up from her feet. He tried asking about her studies, but she responded with monosyllables. "Is it difficult?" "Yes." "Do you like it?" "It's logical." Levi felt like he was hitting a glass wall. The hope that renting the room would be a simple, purely financial solution began to fade. Kiara's presence, even silent, created a tension in the small apartment. Hannah was confused. "Daddy, why doesn't the new lady talk to me?" she asked one night, her eyes wide and sad. "She's just shy, honey," Levi replied, though he wasn't sure that was the right word. The truth was, he was starting to regret it. He felt like an intruder in his own home. The situation worsened when he ran into Max Lefebvre, the building's superintendent and owner, in the hallway. Max was a small man with a huge ego, who relished wielding his minor power over tenants. He looked at Levi with a sneering smile. "Heard you got yourself a roommate, Park. Business that bad?" he said, loud enough for the neighbor next door to hear. Levi felt his face burn. "She's a student. It's temporary," he muttered. Max laughed. "Be careful you don't turn this into a boarding house. We don't want just any kind of people devaluing the building." That comment hit Levi like a punch. Any kind of people. He felt shame and rage. Shame for his financial situation, rage at Max's arrogance. He started to wonder if Max was right. Had he brought trouble into his home? His concern intensified when one night he heard voices coming from Kiara's room. The door was ajar, and he could catch a fragment of a phone conversation. Her voice was strained, almost inaudible. "I told you I'm fine, I can manage." From the other end of the line, a male voice, cold and authoritarian, responded with something Levi couldn't understand, but the tone was one of impatience and disdain. "No, I don't need anything. Please, stop calling," Kiara said, and abruptly hung up. Levi recoiled from the door, his heart pounding. He imagined a controlling father, an abusive ex-boyfriend. The fragility he'd sensed in her on the first day now seemed more dangerous. He felt responsible. She was under his roof. The false hope of an easy solution completely dissolved, replaced by a real, palpable fear. He hadn't just rented a room. He had invited a mystery into his home, and he had no idea how to handle it. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Hannah had had a terrible day at school. A classmate pushed her in the playground and she scraped her knee. The teacher didn't see it, and Hannah felt like nobody cared. When Levi picked her up, her face was streaked with tears and a hurt silence clung to her. At home, the dam broke. She started crying, a loud, desperate wail of a child feeling the weight of a small injustice. Levi hugged her, trying to comfort her, but the day's exhaustion left him impatient. He just wanted silence. That's when the door to Kiara's room opened. She appeared in the hallway, hands covering her ears, a look of genuine pain on her face. Hannah's crying seemed to be causing her physical suffering. Her eyes were squeezed shut, and she was shaking, her head slightly. In that moment, Levi's exhaustion and stress overflowed. All the worry and strangeness of the past few weeks turned into anger. "What is it?" he growled, more aggressively than he intended. "It's a child crying. A little compassion wouldn't kill you, you know?" The words were out before he could stop them. The effect on Kiara was immediate. She flinched, as if struck. Her eyes flew open, filled with an emotion Levi couldn't decipher. Fear, perhaps, or hurt. Without a word, she turned and closed her bedroom door. The click of the lock sounded like a final verdict in the silent apartment. Hannah's crying stopped. She looked at her father, her eyes wide. Regret hit Levi like cold water. What had he done? He had attacked the most vulnerable person in the house. He felt like a monster. He tried knocking on Kiara's door, apologizing, but there was no response. The night was long and heavy. Levi barely slept, replaying his own cruelty. He decided that, the next morning, he would ask Kiara to leave. It was better for everyone. He wasn't the right person to deal with, whatever it was she had. He was failing as a host, as a human being, and he was teaching Hannah the worst lessons. In the morning, he woke with a sense of dread. He made Hannah's breakfast in silence, waiting for the hum of Kiara's blender, but it didn't come. Her bedroom door remained shut. When he took Hannah to her room to get dressed, he saw it. On the nightstand, next to the bunny lamp, sat a small origami bird perfectly folded from blue paper. Beside it, a single piece of chocolate, the expensive kind Hannah adored and he rarely could afford. Hannah picked up the bird, her eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, look, it's so beautiful." Levi picked up the origami. The paper was thick, high quality. On one side, he saw tiny letters and numbers. It looked like a financial report or something. He didn't pay much attention. What mattered was the gesture. It wasn't an apology in words, but it was something more. It was a bridge, an attempt at communication in a language she understood. Kiara wasn't cold. She wasn't indifferent. She was just different. And in that moment, Levi understood he had been wrong about everything. He wouldn't kick her out. He would try to understand. That little paper bird changed everything. It was as if a key had turned in a lock Levi didn't even know existed. He began to observe Kiara not with suspicion, but with curiosity. He noticed how the harsh, fluorescent light of the supermarket made her blink, how she flinched when a bus rumbled by on the street. She wasn't antisocial. The world was simply too loud for her. Levi started making small adjustments. He replaced the hallway light bulb with a softer one. He began to announce himself before turning on the vacuum cleaner. They were small things, but Kiara seemed to notice. The tension in her shoulders eased a little. One day, he saw her in the canned goods aisle at the grocery store, frozen, looking completely overwhelmed by the sheer number of options. He approached slowly and, without a word, picked up the brand of beans he used himself and placed it in her basket. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of gratitude in her eyes before she looked away. Their communication began to develop into a silent code of actions. The biggest proof that something was changing came when Levi's car broke down. It was a part in the engine, the mechanic said, and the repair would cost $800. $800. To Levi, it might as well have been $1 million. That car was his lifeline. Without it, he couldn't do the late-night deliveries. He'd lose his second job. Panic washed over him. He spent the night at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. Hannah slept on the couch, and Kiara's door was shut. He felt utterly alone and defeated. He must have made some noise because the next morning he found a white envelope slid under his door. His name, Levi, was written in precise, elegant handwriting. With his heart in his throat, he opened it. Inside were $800 bills and a short note. "This is an advance on the next 4 months' rent. Please accept it." Levi stared at the money, stunned. How? Where did a college student living in his spare room get $800 in cash? His first reaction was to refuse. It was too much. It was charity. He knocked on her door. When she opened it, he held out the envelope. "Kiara, I can't accept this." She looked at the money, then at his face. "The car is necessary for your work," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "But how did you?" he stammered. She seemed uncomfortable. "I have an account," she said vaguely. "An emergency fund. This is an emergency. You give us a home. It's an investment." The word investment sounded strange, but the sincerity in her tone was undeniable. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering a solution. With a heart heavy with gratitude and confusion, he accepted. In that moment, Levi realized that Kiara wasn't the fragile person he needed to protect. In a quiet, powerful way, she was the one protecting his little family. The shift wasn't a loud event, but a silent understanding. They were no longer just a landlord and a tenant. They were something more. From that day on, the dynamic of the small apartment shifted into something akin to a family. A peculiar, quiet family, but a family nonetheless. Kiara began to emerge from her shell. One evening, she saw Hannah struggling with her math homework. Levi was trying to help, but his frustration was only making things worse. Kiara approached the table, picked up a pencil, and without a word began drawing diagrams. She explained fractions using pizza slices and percentages with building blocks. Her explanation was so clear, so logical, that a light switched on in Hannah's eyes. "I get it," she shouted, impulsively hugging Kiara. Kiara stiffened for a second, surprised by the contact, but then, very subtly, she gave Hannah an awkward pat on the back. It was a small victory, but for Levi, watching from the doorway, it felt like a miracle. Hannah, in turn, learned Kiara's language. She knew Kiara needed quiet to read, so she played with her headphones. She learned that Kiara always drank the same chamomile tea at 9 p.m., and she started leaving her favorite mug already set, out on the counter. They became a team. The real test came in the form of Max Lefebvre. The superintendent showed up on a Saturday night unannounced, banging on the door loudly. When Levi opened it, Max shoved him aside and barged in, his face red with anger. "What's all this noise, Park? I got a complaint about loud music." There was no music. The apartment was silent. Hannah was drawing, and Kiara was reading on the couch. It was an excuse, a pretext to intimidate. "There's no music, Max," Levi said, trying to keep his voice calm. Max glanced around with disdain. "Maybe it's your weird tenant. Who knows what she does hold up in there?" Before Levi could explode, a calm, firm voice cut through the air. Section 7B of the lease agreement requires 24 hours written notice for any non-emergency entry to the property. It was Kiara. She was standing, her book closed in her hand. She was looking directly at Max Lefebvre, and for the first time, Levi saw fire in her eyes. "You gave no notice. Therefore, you are trespassing. Kindly exit now." The authority in her voice was absolute. Max stammered. He, who loved to quote obscure rules to others, was caught in his own trap. He blabbered something about being the owner, but the confidence on his face had vanished. Kiara didn't blink. She just waited silently. Defeated, Max turned and left, slamming the door behind him. The ensuing silence was broken by Hannah's giggling. Levi looked at Kiara, who had already settled back down, and opened her book as if nothing had happened. He didn't know where she found that strength, but he felt a surge of pride and gratitude so intense it almost took his breath away. That quiet, reclusive girl was the strongest person he knew. She was their guardian. Levi sat in the dim living room, long after Hannah had fallen asleep, and thought about how his life had changed. The constant fear about bills had receded, replaced by a new sense of stability. But the most profound change wasn't financial. It was internal. He remembered his initial judgment of Kiara. He saw her as weird, difficult, someone who needed to be managed. He was ashamed of his own ignorance. He thought he was offering her a roof, an act of charity. The truth was, she had offered him and Hannah so much more. She had given them a lesson in acceptance. She had shown them that strength doesn't have to be loud, and that kindness can come in the quietest of gestures. He realized that the definition of family had nothing to do with blood ties, but everything to do with presence, with mutual care, with creating a safe space where everyone could be exactly who they are. Meanwhile, in her room, Kiara was typing an email to her professor and mentor, Julia Azevedo Wilson. She described the progress in her research on neutron star formation, detailing complex equations. But at the end of the email, she added a personal paragraph, something she rarely did. "For the first time," she wrote, "I feel I've found an environment where my mind can concentrate without the background noise of anxiety. I've found a place of acceptance. It's remarkable how the absence of judgment can be a catalyst for intellectual clarity." This place of acceptance was Levi's small apartment. It was the opposite of her childhood home, a cold, silent mansion where her father, Theodore Fan, a business magnate, viewed her autism not as a part of her, but as a defect to be corrected or, at worst, hidden. Therapists, special schools, tutors. It was all designed to make her seem normal. No one ever asked what she needed. They just imposed what they thought she should be. Living with Levi and Hannah was the first time she felt not just tolerated, but valued for her logical mind, her direct honesty, and her unique way of seeing the world. She was finally home. The irony was that she had to run away from a fortune to find true wealth in a place where money was the scarcest commodity. Max Lefebvre's revenge was not long in coming. Humiliated and furious, he found a loophole, a lie he could exploit. A week after the confrontation, an official notice was tacked to Levi's door. An eviction order. The justification: lease violation for overcrowding and harboring an unapproved tenant. Max was twisting facts, claiming Kiara wasn't a formal renter but a long-term guest, which was prohibited. It was a blatant lie, but with legal power on his side, the threat was real. Panic seized Levi again. Losing the apartment meant losing everything. The final confrontation took place in the building's lobby. Max was there, a triumphant smirk on his face, overseeing the forced removal of Levi's belongings. A few neighbors watched, some with pity, others with morbid curiosity. "I told you so, Park," Max said loudly so everyone could hear. "This is a family building, not a shelter for troublemakers." At that exact moment, a sleek, black luxury sedan pulled up in front of the building. The driver opened the door, and an imposing man, dressed in a suit that cost more than Levi's rent for a year, stepped out. It was Theodore Fan. His presence was so magnetic and powerful that the entire lobby fell silent. Max Lefebvre's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Fan, what a surprise. What brings you to our humble abode?" Theodore ignored him completely. His cold eyes found Chiara, who stood beside Levi, pale but resolute. "Chiara," he said, his voice cutting, "this charade is over. You're coming home. Now." Chiara didn't move. "No, Father, I'm already home." Levi, feeling a protective impulse, stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, she's my tenant. You can't just—" Theodore laughed, a joyless sound. "You? What can you possibly offer her? This hovel," he said, gesturing contemptuously at the modest apartment. The public humiliation was complete. The whispers of the neighbors were like knives. But then, Chiara's voice rang out, clear and unwavering, filling the silence. "He offered me a home," she said, looking at her father. "He and his daughter have given me kindness and acceptance, things your money could never buy." Theodore's jaw dropped. He had never heard his daughter speak with such force. Chiara then turned to Max Lefebvre, whose face displayed a mixture of confusion and fear. "And as for you," she continued, her voice glacial, "I would like to inform you that my father's company, Fan International, concluded the acquisition of this building last night. As my first recommendation on the new board, your employment contract is terminated, effective immediately." Max Lefebvre's face drained of all color. He went as white as a ghost. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd of neighbors. Theodore Fan looked at his daughter, stunned, seeing for the first time not a condition to be managed but a woman of impressive strength and intelligence. Defeated and bewildered, he looked at Chiara and asked, his voice barely a whisper, "What do you want, Chiara? What do you truly want?" Chiara looked at Levi and Hannah, who watched her with admiration, and then back at her father. Her answer was simple, yet laden with a profound meaning that everyone there understood. "I want a key that fits." That sentence echoed in the hall, sealing everyone's fate. Chiara's family, Theodore, was not the one she chose, but Levi's, the single dad who welcomed her in, yes. The story didn't end with Chiara returning to her father's empty mansion. She stayed, using her own resources, which she now controlled with newfound confidence. She ensured the eviction notice was quashed. Max Lefebvre disappeared, a bitter memory of a past of prejudice. They didn't stay in that small apartment for long. Chiara helped Levi find a larger place, a place with a small yard for Hannah to play in, and a quiet room for her to study the stars. But they didn't separate. They moved in together, Levi, Hannah, and Chiara, a family forged not by blood, but by acceptance, respect, and the small gestures of care that, in the end, proved stronger than any fortune. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the different ways a family can be, then please like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes, the story we share is exactly the story someone somewhere needs to hear today so they don't feel alone.